Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really going to unpack the Trump tariffs. You shared some great material, and it looks like a pretty significant moment in, well, recent economic history.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a complex topic, but the goal here is to sort of distill it, right? Understand the key pieces, what they were, the fallout, and what it maybe tells us about global trade now.
Exactly. We want those crucial insights. But, without getting totally bogged down in jargon. So
Yeah.
let's maybe start right there. Tariffs, what are we actually talking about?
Right. So, put simply, they're taxes on goods that are imported into a country.
Okay, taxes on imports.
Yeah, and a really key point, which your notes highlighted too, is who pays them. It's usually the domestic companies, the ones actually bringing the goods in,
Uh-huh.
and those costs. Well, they often find their way to consumers eventually. It's not always direct, but it tends to trickle down.
Gotcha. So 2018, things really seemed to ramp up then. What were the first big moves?
Yeah, 2018 was definitely the kickoff. The administration started with tariffs on steel that was 25% and aluminum, which was 10%.
Okay.
And the justification they used was national security, citing Section 232 of U.S. trade law. That allows for tariffs if imports threaten national security.
Right, the national security angle, I remember that.
Exactly. And then pretty soon after came a much broader set of tariffs aimed specifically at China. This eventually covered, I think, over $100 billion worth of goods.
Wow, that's huge.
It really was, and these were under a different part of the law, Section 301, which deals with unfair trade practices. The main reason given was intellectual property theft concerns.
And looking at the material, it wasn't just China in the crosshairs, was it?
No, definitely not. The EU, Canada, Mexico, they all got hit with tariffs too, particularly on steel and aluminum initially.
So what was the big picture goal here? What were they trying to achieve with all this?
Well, the stated aims, based on the documents and rhetoric, were things like reducing the U.S. trade deficit, trying to encourage manufacturing to come back to the U.S., reshoring, and putting pressure on China specifically to change some of its trade practices.
Which kind of brings us to that famous quote, trade wars are good and easy to win.
Yeah.
How did that play out globally? Did other countries just accept it?
Oh, definitely not. Imposing tariffs like that, it pretty much guarantees a reaction. It wasn't a one-way street at all.
So retaliation was swift.
Absolutely. Almost immediately.
Right.
China, for instance, targeted major U.S. exports. Soybeans were huge, pork, even aircraft, things that would really hit specific U.S. industries.
Right, hitting where it hurts.
Exactly. And the EU, they went after iconic American products, bourbon, motorcycles, jeans, agricultural stuff too. Canada and Mexico mostly focused their counter tariffs on steel and various farm goods.
So, okay, that's the global back and forth.
Yeah.
What about the effects here domestically? Did people feel this?
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just theoretical economics. Farmers, particularly in the Midwest growing soybeans for export to China, saw prices plummet. It got so bad the government stepped in with a huge bailout package, something like $28 billion, I think one source mentioned.
Well, 28 billion. Yeah, that's significant.
Definitely. And then for consumers, you probably started seeing prices creep up on things like washing machines, electronics, anything using imported steel, aluminum, or components, really. And some companies, like Harley-Davidson was a big example that came up, even talked about moving more production overseas to avoid the retaliatory tariffs from places like the EU.
Yeah.
Kind of the opposite effect of what was intended in some ways.
Yeah, that's complex. It raises that question of who actually ends up paying for all this, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Now, the materials also showed there was a real economic debate swirling around this, arguments both for and against.
Okay, so what was the argument for the tariffs?
Well, the proponents, they often pointed to protecting jobs in specific sectors like steel and aluminum. The idea was the tariffs would shield those industries from foreign competition, at least for a while.
Short-term protection, maybe?
Potentially, yeah. And they also highlighted the Phase 1 trade deal reached with China in early 2020 as a win, arguing the tariffs were necessary leverage to get China to the negotiating table and make some commitments.
Okay. But then there were the critics. What were their main points? The downsides.
Right. The criticisms were pretty significant. Many economic studies suggested the tariffs actually acted as a drag on overall U.S. GDP growth, maybe around 0.5% by 2020.
Drag on the whole economy.
Yeah, and some research indicated net job losses overall, potentially over 300,000 jobs, when you factor in the higher costs for businesses using imported goods and the impact of retaliation on exports.
The jobs saved in one area might be lost elsewhere.
Exactly. That was the argument. Plus, Many argued the tariffs seriously escalated tensions with China, maybe even fueling what some call a tech Cold War, rather than actually resolving the core trade disagreements effectively. The data seemed to suggest the costs were pretty widespread, while the benefits were maybe more concentrated or short-lived.
So, looking at where we are now,
Mm.
what's the legacy? Are these tariffs still around? Have things gone back to how they were before?
Not entirely, no. The Biden administration actually kept many of the Trump-era tariffs in place, especially on China.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but the approach has shifted somewhat. There's been more focus on working with allies again. For example, they reached a kind of truce with the EU, suspending some of the mutual tariffs related to steel and aluminum.
Okay, so less confrontational maybe, more alliance building.
Perhaps. And we're also seeing this broader trend, maybe accelerated by the tariffs and the pandemic, of companies trying to diversify their supply chains. You hear terms like decoupling or de-risking, basically, trying not to rely so heavily on just one country like China.
Right, spreading the risk.
Exactly. And another interesting thing is this growing, well, skepticism, maybe, across both political parties towards the old model of completely free trade. There seems to be more appetite for interventionist policies than there used to be.
That's a really key takeaway, that shift in thinking.
I think so. The question of whether tariffs or similar tools might be used again, especially with competition heating up in areas like semiconductors or electric vehicles, that seems very much alive.
So, pulling it all together from the sources, it's clear these tariffs were a huge deal, a major intervention with really widespread consequences. Some intended, some maybe not so much.
Absolutely. The goals were ambitious, shaking up the trade system, but the actual results, they're still being debated, and they've definitely reshaped how companies and countries interact economically. It really highlights just how tangled up the global economy is.
Yeah. This deep dive certainly gives us a clearer picture, but also a lot to think about regarding the complexity of it all. What this means for the future of trade. Definitely something to keep mulling over. Thanks for helping us unpack all that.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating ongoing story.